Chronic. Tick, 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 boom. Yes, it is that fine day in everybody's week that you have been clamoring for. It is Meltdown Monday for each and every one of you across the world that beautifully joins us for the most scintillating conversations, the most fun, crazy games, and yes, to hear from the finest man in any room. My name's Finkill. I'm your Manchester rep, sat here in the UK bomb shelter, and it has been one hell of a week. We have welcomed so many members of the pro wrestling royalty, including Jerry the King Lawler. I'm sure I've got a picture knocking around that we'll throw up on screen real soon. But they all descended on Manchester last weekend for the love of wrestling was off the charts with over 40 of the biggest names that you guys will have grew up on and watch every single week on your TV sets. No matter where you are, from pole to pole, they were there. And I'm going to give you the full lowdown on it a little bit later on. But before we do that, it would be remiss of me if I didn't acknowledge that man right there. He is the creation of devastation. He is the bomber. He is my tag team partner and three-time tag team champion of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we do it each and every week, but wherever you are, except if you're driving, put your hands together for the legend of Bryan Clark.
I'll take that hot tag each and every week here on the Meltdown. He is, ladies and gentlemen, the Tomcat, the three-time UK host of the year. So do not get it twisted. That man is a multiple talented individual. He can do it all. And it sounds like you had a blast for the love of wrestling. You know, a lot of my friends were at that show. Our good friend Jonathan O'Dwyer was there. You finally got to meet Jonathan, which was, I seen the pictures. They look great. And yeah, man, I'm glad you had a good time.
Looked like we had fun, man. Very honestly. Busy. Yeah, meeting up with Jonathan was exceptional. So hello to you, good sir, the third member of our three amigos. And speaking of the three amigos, they're over my shoulder today. Can you see us right there, Brian? There we are, right there, rocking it. The third member of our three amigos, Jonathan, it was so wonderful to see you, mate. I hope you had an amazing weekend. I got to hang out for pretty much the full weekend with our friend of the show, the Blue Meanie, and his wonderful wife, Tracy, Mrs. Meanie. I literally took them from the shittiest parts of Manchester to the creme de la creme of Manchester. It was a full swerve. If you ever see him, just ask him how awful that lift actually smelled. It was really bad. Ooh. It was really bad. But we had some really good fun. Got to meet up with the Sandman. Got to have a really good time and probably like 3 or 4 hours with Kevin Nash and Rob Van Dam. And we had an absolute blast. It was incredible. I'm sure post show we'll relay a couple of these pictures that I've got knocking around. And you know what? I've just been having a look around sort of the bomb shelter here in the UK, and I forgot about so many parts of like wrestling memorabilia that I picked up over the years. Like we've got like Cactus Jack that was signed from the 1995 King of the Death matches. That bad boy, wow, yeah, unbelievable. Like Roddy Piper's stuff. In fact, so much so I found Sergeant Slaughter's underwear as well. It's just so weird. It's so unique.
I'm not touching that. I don't want to know why Sarge's underwear ends up in your place. Okay.
Very odd, mate. Honestly, if anybody was to literally invade my house, it's like a home invasion. God forbid anybody breaks into my house to steal anything. That I think they'd turn around and walk out and go, I'll just leave this. I'll leave this. Thank you so much. But we have got an absolutely off the chart show for you guys today because today is the very first, and we like very firsts because you know what today is, Brian? It is the very first time that we have had a member of the NWO grace the Meltdown stage. And we are in for a treat. Are you ready to build it up? Let's go for it. Let's go, 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 go.
Let's hit it, Tomcat. Today's guest is a name that wrestling fans across the globe may remember in different and unforgettable ways. From the high energy rings of Japan to the larger than life spectacles of American television wrestling, he carved out a unique and fascinating place in this industry.
From competing in WCW during one of the most explosive eras in pro wrestling to solidifying his mark in wrestling history in New Japan. Fans know him by several personas: Cobra, Lightning, and perhaps most famously the NWO version of Sting during wrestling's hottest angle of the late 1990s.
His career has become part of wrestling lore, from his time in Japan as Team 2000 Super J to his memorable television appearances during the Monday Night Wars. Whether you know him for his in ring work, his unique character, his story is one that reflects a truly fascinating era of professional wrestling. Please welcome former WCW and New Japan Pro Wrestling superstar Jeff Farmer.
Woo!
Thank you, Tom and Brian. Thank you for having me on your show. That's a very nice introduction and a great welcome. A lot of pressure on this show. You got a lot of pressure here.
No, no. It's all fun, man. No pressure at all. So don't even. We're the furthest thing from pressure, man.
Well, it's great to
No
be here.
worries. Yeah.
As we always say, we are the most positive podcast on the internet. Yes, no matter where you are, please make sure if you've yet to do so, click that subscribe button, click that like, ring that notification bell, and leave us a little 5-star review on Spotify. It's what it's all about. We are all here to tell you stories about the light side of the ring, the stories that make you smile, the stories that make you reminisce about nostalgic periods in your life. And today is going to be something special. Let's kick it off.
All right, let's do it. Our 18,000 plus subscribers here on the Meltdown. We thank you all so very much. And again, as promised, another superstar in this lineup. So, Jeff, let's peel back the layers, man. Let's get it kicked off here. I got a question for you, buddy. Here we go. You ready?
Yep.
All right, hit you with it. Okay, before the NWO Sting character, fans also fondly remember you from your days working as Cobra. As part and also part of the team Thunder and Lightning. Now, you and I go way back to that time period of a little bit overlapping. So, be a two-part question. Tell me about Thunder and Lightning, how you guys got together. I always wondered that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Clark Haynes was Thunder
Right.
and was my best friend. We both were personal trainers working at a gym. Both of us kind of had the bodybuilding interests, as most pro wrestlers did, or football, which I did both. And it was really Clark's idea to do the pro wrestling. And Scott Hall was actually in our town. Orlando is where we were.
Right.
And I had bumped into Scott Hall a few times at Orange Avenue Gym, which was one of the oldest gyms in Orlando. And so we kind of knew Scott and Clark had the idea. So we actually came up with Thunder and Lightning like in our apartment, and we just wrote everything up. And we were thinking at the time of the WWF, so we had capes and kind of that kind of style to our outfits, back then. And we ended up going to Steve Kern's school that he had in Tampa. I don't know if you remember that back then. It was a warehouse. And Jimmy Backlund was there. I remember Jimmy Backlund and
Sure
Ron Slinker and some other people that they had as coaches. And we, it's a great story because we paid, our money and went down there. And as pro wrestling sometimes tends to be, they basically want to take our money and just kind of stretch us a little bit and have us be on our way, But Clark and I were just so determined and we're like, oh, and I came from a football background. So, initially I thought, this is going to be very physical, very difficult. So I was prepared for that.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, we started out there training under Kern and then worked at Eddie Mansfield. I don't know if you know that name, started the International Wrestling Federation in Orlando. And our first match was televised. Like Clark and I were so
Oh, wow.
nervous, we just, we're so green. And I remember our first match that we ever had was a television taping for the IWF, and we ended up being the tag team champions there at the International Wrestling Federation. We never went anywhere outside of, Orlando, whatever. And that was actually the start of the Smoking Guns, if you remember them.
Oh, absolutely.
Uh,
Yes.
they were there at the time. Van Dam was there. They brought in Blackjack Mulligan. Um, uh, Dick Slater came in a little bit. So there was guys coming in and out of that little independent uh, company, and we were based in Orlando. And then from there, actually, Dory Funk Jr. I was going to correct this. We kind of talked briefly about Japan. My first time in Japan was actually for All Japan, which was their tag team tournament in '93, and that was the tournament where Terry Gordy, had the OD on the
Oh, yeah.
plane. That was,
Right.
as our first exposure. And I'll talk more about that story later if you
Okay.
want, which is an
Yeah. Yeah.
incredible story.
Right.
But that's kind of how we started out as Thunder and Lightning there in the International Wrestling Federation, and then scouted by WCW. Jody Hamilton watched one of our
Right.
matches and said, "Hey, we want you guys to come to Atlanta and be a tag team there." And we were at, again, Tom, you'll know some of this. We were some of the original guys at the power plant back then. I mean, with Sarge and everybody, the old school that was in Jonesboro, Georgia. That was where we ended up being there, which was I'll tell you more stories about that, which was not fun, but also so much learning that we had there, which was incredible. So I know I'm moving a little fast here, but
No, that's okay because that was my follow-up. That was actually it. And yeah, we can't talk about Sarge, but real quick, I want to touch back on something. You said college football, or
yeah,
is that right? Tell
yep.
me about that.
Well, I was a high school. I was an offensive lineman. I was skinny, but I was a little tall, so I was like 185 pounds in high school. But we did a lot of pulling, so I was like an all area guard. But I ended up going to Central Florida, UCF, where I was
Yes.
a linebacker and defensive end for them, and that was a long time ago. And they had actually Lou Saban, who coached O.J. Simpson in the Buffalo
Right.
Bills, was the head coach when I got there. He recruited me, and I ended up playing at Central Florida for those last 2 years. And I was scouted by the NFL. I thought I was going to play in the NFL, and it just didn't happen. The Steelers and the Giants both kind of were, interested, but you know how that goes, and you're kind of
Yeah.
like, didn't get a call back. So I kind of ended up not playing. I thought I was going to, but ended up, getting in the gym business and personal training and managing a gym, and so kind of went another route.
Well, that's great, man. A lot of times we in our previous shows we've had a lot of college football players. Uh, some guys that, like you said, were about to go into the NFL. So yeah, man, I know that they will appreciate that because a lot of our fans are very diverse. They listen to football, pro wrestling, a little bit of soccer, if you will, for the Tomcat there.
It's
But yeah, I just
football.
wanted
It's
to know that.
football.
There's
Let's
a
do it properly. It's
Football,
football.
I
It's
know, I
football.
know.
Yeah, that's true. American football, but yeah, I mean, you got those guys like Ron Simmons, who again I had
Yeah,
the pleasure of wrestling Ron, before, and he's a little older than me, but I remember watching him, at Florida State and just saying, oh my God, this guy's incredible. So those guys, there's a lot of, I think, crossover between guys that were athletic football players that got in the business that were good athletes. Because one of the things about pro wrestling that shocked me was that I was surprised at how athletic you had to be, right, to be a professional wrestler. And I was playing linebacker, which is a pretty skilled position as far as agility and stuff. And you did I was shocked. And so when I saw big men like Bryan actually here, who you see them do that, guys that big. It's incredible. And you watch some of those, it takes a lot of Kevin Nash is another one, Scott Hall, those guys. The athletic ability required to be a professional wrestler, a lot of people don't understand is so much. And the guys that are successful in the business, they're athletic men or women, both, both sides.
yeah.
Well, from the gridiron to the gym, you guys have torn it up all over the States and have been seen all over the world. And one of the big things that I always took away from seeing you on screen, Jeff, is your incredible physique. So we're going to hit our first game straight off the bat. and we are going to split this bad boy up in two because our Meltdown maniacs have been clamoring for just a little bit more of these hands, and someone's about to get these hands. It's time to play Winner Stays On Part 1. And seeing as Jeff graced our screens with the most incredible physique and most muscular poses, we are going to give him that topic today. It's going to be the most muscular. I'm going to rub my hands together, brother. You are going to be presented with two names that will go one-on-one against each other. You're going to put one over, and I'm going to drop one. And then we're going to insert the next name. You've got 10, and we're going to find out who wins in Group 1. So, Jeff Farmer, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's flex it. It's time to go. First two names, Hulk Hogan and Lex Luger.
I'm going to go with Lex Luger.
We will say goodbye to the immortal. Lex Luger or the Ultimate Warrior?
Ooh, that's a really, really tough one. I'm going to give it to Jim Hellwig during his peak. He was. I'll give the nod to Jim Hellwig.
Luger has been racked. Warrior stays on. Warrior or Road Warrior Hawk?
Again, really, that's a really close one. I'm still going to give it to Jim Hellwig, Warrior.
Let's keep on. Distrosicity carries on. The Ultimate Warrior or Sid Vicious?
Ultimate Warrior.
Warrior or Davey Boy Smith?
Davey Boy Smith had incredible physique too, but Ultimate Warrior again.
Okay, this one might test you. Ultimate Warrior or Sting?
That's a good one too. And Sting was known for the most muscular, which I had to copy to play him actually. Yes. So I'm still going to give Hellwig in his prime the nod.
Okay, cool. We're shaking those ropes. Ultimate Warrior or Scott Steiner?
Again, Scott, as a friend of mine, I know Scott really well. One of the best physiques in the business, actually. But I'm going to give the edge again to, I think Ultimate Warrior as a bodybuilding physique, he had a good balance, had good symmetry. He was cut, if you look at all those little intricacies of that, I still got to give it to him.
We've got to keep the power of the face paint, right? Let's carry on. Ultimate Warrior or Superstar Billy Graham?
Ooh, again, you're making this tough for me.
Oh, yeah. That's what we don't make it easy, brother. We're putting you under that microscope.
And I think for his time, right? Billy's Superstar Graham was a little bit, this is before, Billy Superstar Graham had one of the best, most musculars for sure, especially for that era. But again, just overall, I'm going to have to give it to Ultimate Warrior.
We're going to keep it on with the man from Parts Unknown. Ultimate Warrior or Ryback?
Also a great physique, not as cut as the Warrior. So I'll give it to the Ultimate Warrior. Bryan, I hope you're backing me up on some of
Hey, man, this is a hell of a list. So I'm going with it. Keep rolling, brother.
And just an interesting note, Bryan made this list. Let's carry on. Ultimate Warrior or Tony Atlas?
That, wow. That's one of my toughest ones because when I first got in the business, Tony Atlas and Butch Reed, that tag team, when I saw them come out, I mean, personally, this is hard because I like the bigger, bulkier physique of Tony Atlas personally. But if you're talking about, cuts and everything popping out, I still give the nod to the Ultimate Warrior as a physique. But personally, I really thought that that tag team just looked amazing.
Yeah, they were amazing.
I still give it a Hellwig.
Okay, just one more from round number one.
But you're making it tough, Tom. You're making this really tough.
Honestly, we're sat here in the middle of the night pretty much. It's dark outside, and I've eaten so much for Sunday lunch, I need a nap. It is the Ultimate Warrior or Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff.
Paul had one of the best physiques. Now, you're also talking about someone very, very close because, again, and as a bodybuilder, I used to compete a long time ago, so you got to look at everything, proportions. Some guys, they have a big upper body, but their legs don't have the muscular structure. So they look good in a pair of jeans, but they don't look good in a pair of tights necessarily, right? So Orndorff was one of those guys that had everything. He was a total package, great balance, great symmetry, big legs, cut, looked amazing. Wow, you're making this tough, guys. But I'm just gonna still stick with Jim just for the fact that he was probably more of a little bit of a competitive looking physique. a little more cut than Paul. But I loved Paul's physique. I thought he looked amazing.
Well, the
Also,
ultimate. Oh, go on, Jeff. Sorry, I
no,
didn't
I'm
want
just
to cut
saying.
you off.
Also, lucky enough to work with Paul before and take his pile driver, which is never fun. But Paul's awesome. You know,
Yes.
R.I.P. to Paul.
Yes, as we do each and every show, we dedicate certain portions to fallen heroes. So let's raise it high for the big man, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Chin chin to you, brother. Chin chin to you. Well, the Ultimate Warrior has taken the big W in our first round. Let's find out who he's going to go against in the final. You guys are going to have to stick around to the end of the show to find out who our next 10 are going to be put under the microscope. Now, before we do a little fast forward and take a step further into WCW, just as we were chatting in our preamble, Bryan did the best impression that he does of any pro wrestler. Let's hear it, big man.
Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Iron Mike Sharp, Canada's greatest athlete. You have a story about him, and he's one of our all-time favorites here on the Meltdown. Jeff, you have got to tell us a Mike Sharp story. Let's hear it.
Yeah, I mean that's a great impression, first of all, and what a gem Iron Mike Sharp was. I mean, what a gem that guy was. I did a trip to Europe. I think it was Austria, and Iron Mike was on that trip. And you know, a couple things about Iron Mike Sharp, and I really liked him a lot. One was we we were at the arena, and you know, you get to the arena like hours and hours early, and Mike is over there like working a bull worker and a training thing off to the side, and he's sweating, and it's like, you know, 3 hours before the show, and I honestly thought it was a rib. I said, you know, this is a really good rib by Mike, you know, and he's over there, and he's pumping away and doing this thing, and I'll kind of all by himself, you know, doing this, and then I come to find out it was not a rib. It was just part of Mike's kind of thing, you know, his nature. And the other thing that was kind of funny, I went to his room for something, and you know, we were only at this hotel for like a day maybe. And Mike had unpacked his entire suitcase. All of the clothes were in the drawers, all of the shirts were hung up, everything was in the thing, and I'm thinking, wow, you know, we're only here for like, you know, 12 hours and we got to go to another town. Mike had everything perfect. So I know he had a little OCD or whatever it might have been. I found out later, but you know, your first impressions of Mike were like that. And then the ring story. Yeah, again, I had the pleasure to get in there with Mike, and he was such a gentleman. But he had these wrist straps, and in the underneath where your wrist is were these big heavy leather laces. And you know, it was part of his show. And I remember we were in there, and he rakes it across my nose. You know, I don't think it was anything intentional, but of course, I start bleeding profusely from this big, you know, thing across my nose. It wasn't intentional, but you know, so it was just an experience, and I was glad to be one of the people that got to wrestle and be on tour with Iron Mike Sharp. Definitely Canada's greatest athlete, by the way.
Yes, absolutely. We always talk about him, and I got to spend some time with him. Never really on tour, more of just at TV tapings and stuff. But the stories are legendary, where he would do, as you said, they mentioned working out for 2 or 3 hours before the show, and then he would do the whole shower gimmick,
Oh, yeah,
where
yeah,
he's
yeah.
in the shower for like 2 hours, like the building's ready to close
I
down,
exactly. I
and
forgot that
he's still,
part. That
yeah,
that
yeah,
actually happened at that show. The same thing. He worked out before the show is over.
mhm,
Everybody's leaving, and he's in the shower. And you know, I'm thinking it was, you know, and I didn't know, you know, it's the first time I'd ever met, you know, Mike Sharp really, you know,
yeah.
in this thing. And it was actually, you know, your buddy, you know, Bill Eadie. Bill Eadie was the one that booked me on this tour. You know, it was a European tour. It was some of the WWF guys were on there,
Mhm.
and Mike was on it. And yeah, what a interesting time. But I thought he was great, and I always liked Mike.
Yeah, I did too. I thought he was a complete gentleman, but it's just some of the little ticks that he had. It was actually pretty funny.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and he was a
you had to
good
see it.
worker. Like
Yes.
he was good in the ring. He had good
Yep.
presence. He knew how to, you know, to work the crowd.
Yeah,
Mike was good.
I totally agree. And a big guy too. What,
Yeah,
6'5",
yeah, he was big.
270? Yeah. So
Absolute beast, was Canada's greatest athlete. So let's send those positive vibes upstairs to the big man. Go for it. We love Iron Mike Sharp.
Yeah.
Well, there was another name that you dropped into conversation just a little bit earlier on, and just before we take a deeper trip into WCW, hit us up with the Terry Gordy story.
Well, that Clark and I that so Dory Funk Jr. booked us with All Japan, and I mean I ended up spending years in New Japan, which was but a totally different company, kind of like the competing company. But All Japan, which was Baba's group, that was a first it was 1993, and Dory Funk got us into a tag team tournament that they had, and so there's a couple good stories. Remember Joel Deaton, Brian?
Absolutely. Yes,
So,
sir. The
so
outlaw.
another gem of a person, Joel Deaton. So we're in the LA airport. This is back in the day, and Brian knows this well. We were wearing the Zuba. I wasn't wearing the Zuba, but everybody's wearing the Zuba pants. And Joel Deaton. We're at the LA airport, and Joel Deaton, he comes walking up, and he looks like he was attacked by a bear. Like his his Zuba pants are ripped to shreds. And and I'm looking at him, and I've never met Joel before. And I'm like, and I said, hey, I said, hey, what happened? He goes, I think they were at the bar drinking earlier. He got caught in an escalator. He got caught in the escalator thing. His pants got caught in there, and it ripped them all up, and he's bleeding.
Oh my God.
So this is in the LA airport. And the other funny part about this is Clark and I, we were drinking protein drinks, at this point. I mean, later we changed,
Well,
but we're like kind of straight and narrow, and we're seeing all this stuff. And and so Clark and I are so green, and we don't know anything, and we're scared, we're like this, and we don't know anything. So we ended up getting on the plane. This was the first thing. So Clark and I were not in the business class, but we're right kind of behind in the economy seats, kind of up close, right? And so we're sitting on the plane, both of us, and all of a sudden it was Gordy and Doc came into the plane, and someone and I didn't see Terry do too much, but Steve, he's cutting a promo in the plane on the person that's in his seat. And I mean, like loud and aggressive. And he's just going off on the guy in the seat and telling the stewardess there, like, we paid $1,000. This is my seat. Get him out of my seat. What's going on? And so Clark and I are sitting there, and again, Brian will appreciate this, especially we're going, that's really them. Like I said, man, this is not a work. Like these guys, this is shoot. These guys are like, animals. And so we're sitting there, I'm going, oh my gosh. And and he had it. He had a cousin, Slinker. What was his name?
Ron Slink. Yeah.
Yeah,
Was
Ron
Ron
Slinker.
Slink?
He
Yeah.
was there. So it was Doc and Terry up in the first class, and Clark and I are kind of back on the left side. They're up in the right side. And yeah, it was a crazy flight. And when we got there to Narita Airport, we didn't know, and we're like sleeping and everything else. And they immediately got an ambulance to come and a wheelchair, and they end up taking Gordy off the plane in a stretcher kind of wheelchair thing. And Doc and Ron went with him, and they go right to the hospital. And we're like, we don't know what happened, some whatever it
Mhm.
was, some medical emergency. We don't know if he had a heart attack or what happened. And then they take him to the hospital, and we got on the bus. Brian knows this well, for All Japan, and they were just came on and said, look, we had a problem, and he's in the hospital, and we're still going to do the tour. I think they replaced him. Actually, I think Ted DiBiase, I think, flew over and took his spot or something, because it was a tag team tournament, and that was Doc's partner. And so, yeah, that was what a wild that tour, whole thing. And I have to tell you, this is a funny story. And although those guys, anybody who wrestled in Japan, and Brian will tell you, you gotta know what you gotta be able to work. It's a whole nother level. And I remember getting there, and Clark and I were green, and we did our best. We were stiff. I'm sure we were terribly stiff to everybody. And but it was a lot of great tag teams. They didn't really let us put us with the top ones. I mean, we got to wrestle some. Even Baba, we got in the ring with him. He was alive at the time, but they didn't give us, the top people because they were probably worried. But I remember thinking like this was so tough and brutal, and I didn't ever want to go back actually to Japan when I got finished with that tour. Not I mean it was fine, but it was just kind of like not a good experience. I didn't speak the language, not they weren't very helpful, and I didn't really have somebody as an advocate for us in any way. And I think some of the guys who some of them were great, like Eagle and Patriot, Del Wilkes and those guys were on the tour, and Joel Deaton, Joel Deaton went on that tour. I saw Joel, and I'm like, this guy, he looks terrible. I'm saying like this guy does not look like he's going to be able to do anything in the ring. And of course, this is a
Yeah.
terrible judgment on my part. When that bell rang and Joel Deaton came out, I said, "Who is this guy?" Like
Yeah.
he became like this maniac guy, kind of Stan Hansen, and they're swinging the bull rope, and Joel was out there, and man, could
He
Joel
go.
work? And I was
Yes.
like, man, don't judge a book by its cover because this guy can go. And I remember being, really impressed with Joel. And I mean, it was an amazing tour for a green, guy. Both Clark and I were super green to kind of have our eyes open a little bit about the business with that. But the opposite, in a way, happened at New Japan. When I got to New Japan, they were like, there was some Tayama was there and Black Cat. You remember Black Cat back in the day? They were like, "How can we help you? We're here to make everything good." And it was just kind of a different. I felt like the boys at All Japan, they were worried about us taking their jobs or their position, which is 100% rightly so. Everybody should be. And it was a very kind of small kind of group, homogenous group there, and they'd all worked hard to get those positions. So
Mhm.
I got that part. But later, New Japan ended up being a really wonderful experience for me in Japan, and totally flipped my impression or whatever you want to call that of wrestling in Japan. But I started out at All Japan.
Bryan, doesn't he just tell stories just so perfect? I was literally hanging
I,
on every
I
word,
just
Jeff.
I'm,
That
I'm
was
learning from
awesome.
that. I'm learning from just what he was telling us is never judge a man by the rips in his Zubaz pants is
Yeah,
basically
yeah.
what he's telling me. By the way, that's the pop of the show. No, that was fantastic. I never heard that story, and I know Joel Deaton, so all of it ties in perfectly with my vision of this thing.
Oh yeah, Joel was, and there was another time he was signing autographs, and of course his match was over, and you remember the whiteboards, and Joel is just scribbling down something that just makes no sense whatsoever, and I think, and I'm like, he'd had a few drinks after, and this is still at the show, and Miss Baba, she was part of the stuff.
Right.
I think she came back and was like, a fan must have went and said, look what this guy signed for me. And it was you can't even you didn't know what it said. You couldn't even read it. Like it's a bunch of squiggly lines and squibbles, and which was to me was hysterical. And they came back, and I don't know who covered for Joel. It might have been Doc or somebody. And they said, yeah, he took a really hard blow to the head, And they said, we're not sure if he's okay, and whatever covered it up. But Joel Deaton was a trip.
Oh yeah, good stuff, man. Love it.
Don't sleep on Joel Deaton. Put his name into your Google machine and
Oh,
live life. Live life.
yeah.
Well, we're going to fast forward just a little bit to just a few weeks before WCW Fall Brawl 96. The NWO was running wild, and the buzz for pro wrestling was back in full force around the world. Eric Bischoff pitches the idea about a change for you from Cobra. What were your initial thoughts about portraying a heel
And
version of
I saw Eric in Japan. I did something with New Japan like in 2019 or something with Muda and those guys. It was like old guy tour kind of a thing, right? Which was fun. But I bumped into Eric and we talked a little bit about it. I didn't know what they really wanted to do, right? Like I was above my pay grade, so to speak, and they weren't letting me in on what was going on. So I really didn't have any idea. But I remember Dallas Page came up to me, who was friends with Eric, and said, they because Cobra wasn't going the way I wanted it to go. That's a whole nother story we can talk about. But and they said, hey, we're thinking you can do this because you look physically kind of like Sting. You guys are about the same size. And I said, yeah, well, whatever. Like I'll do whatever you tell me. I mean, there you're paying me. So Eric, I remember said specifically, if this gets out to anyone, I'm going to squash it. Like we're not going to do it, right? So we had to kind of keep it under wraps, even for the boys. Like nobody really knew what was going on, and I guess that was something they intentionally decided to do. And also, I think it was originally just going to be a one-time kind of thing where I come out, attack Lex, everybody says that's not really Sting, and you get the whole turning of Sting going to the bad side type stuff. But I don't know who kind of said they liked it. I don't know if it was Hogan or whoever and said, "Hey, let's keep this around. We can kind of poke WCW a little bit with this NWO Sting character and kind of caused more trouble. So that kind of transitioned into something a little bit more than what I think was going to be just a one-time kind of shot, and then it ended up becoming more than that. And not to get the head of the story, but when it went to Japan, it kind of became its own thing. So part of that was that obviously NWO was super popular, right? And the guys like Hogan and Nash and Hall, all great guys, but they're not going to go do a tour in Japan for 3 weeks, So Scott Norton, who was already the IWGP Heavyweight Champion there, and amazing, one of my best friends, who really, without Scott, I would not have survived New Japan. Honestly, well, that's another long story, but they weren't going to send the Hogan and those guys over. And they said, okay, well, who can we send? Because they wanted to get NWO going in Japan because it's very popular. So they said, oh, you can take NWO Sting. He can go. And I think, like Mike Rotundo, Bryan knows this, Bryan Adams, his tag team partner, him and I were there. There were, so they were taking some of the guys that they figured could work and kind of fulfill this obligation to New Japan with bringing some NWO, but the top guys were not going to go. I mean, we did the big Tokyo Dome show, and of course they all came over. But at that point, I already been working tours, like bunch of tours already at that point as NWO Sting. And the interesting part was at first, I don't know if you know this, Bryan, but of course I was emulating Steve, with the moves that he was doing, but it ended up morphing into a totally, different character in a way. It was its own bad character. It was like bad Spider-Man or bad Batman or whatever. And so I started painting my face a little bit different. I started, I never wore a singlet. Steve, I always wore the singlet. I always wore just tights and an open top, and I wore the NWO, but our outfits were different. I painted a little bit different. And after a while, I started not doing so much of what Steve was doing. I kind of started doing my own, character a little bit. And they knew, actually, the Japanese fans knew the difference. And it was a big kind of thing that they were definitely not the same kind of, character. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah, no, that was awesome. I mean, from your experience, what did Steve think about this?
That's another great question. I always liked Steve. When I first got into WCW and Bryan was there, two of the guys I admired most were Lex Luger and Steve, because I just thought the way they handled themselves, the way they carried themselves. Back then, Bryan will laugh. Everybody had the Halliburtons. Remember those days?
Oh yeah.
Bryan. So, like they're coming in all like very professional and, they got the Zubas on and they're bringing the Halliburtons and, it's like a very serious kind of thing. So I remember when I first got in there, thinking, wow, these guys, are something else. And I always got along fine with Steve. He seemed fine with everything, but, I'm sure nobody wants, their character to be duplicated or have a second one or anything. I'm sure that's not something that he probably was comfortable with. Obviously, I'm never going to take his place or anything, but it's just probably not. I don't know how he really felt, and I don't know how much input he had into everything or not. I mean, Bischoff would know, but I don't know. I was just really kind of doing my job and doing what they told me. But he was always cool with me, and I always had a nice relationship with Steve.
Well, that's good to hear from a fan's perspective.
Yeah, yeah. I admire and respect him greatly.
I think that was
Hopefully he knows
smart.
that.
I think that was a smart thing that you were doing in Japan is making the small, subtle changes.
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
do. And I'll tell you why, because when you were telling me this, it made me think back to like WWF at the time had Undertaker versus Undertaker. And
Yeah.
it was horrible. That's
Yeah.
all it was. It was as flat as can be. I was there in Chicago at the PLE. I worked the show. It was just flat, and the buildup was flat. Where with you, you're doing different stuff. Everybody knows you started out as the bad Sting, but
Yeah.
now you're in Japan and you're getting it over.
Yeah.
I mean, I would remember hearing stories about how over it was. So I think that you were doing the right thing, making those small changes. I want to ask you this going into that now. You two never really worked a program, but man, I could see money. Whereas
Oh,
Undertaker versus Undertaker
right.
was like I said, flat. But
Bryan,
you being in Japan and Sting versus the Japan version, thoughts?
you are right. You're 100% right and very astute for you to see that. And you're right. A lot of, those kind of things don't work, but this would have been huge, and I'll tell you why. A, that I did change the style on purpose, and that was, and then my character became very popular, in Japan. As a matter of fact, they did the ratings. They used to have this ratings that would come out on the top gaijins in Japan in the wrestling magazines, and I at one point is either third or fifth in the country, and Steve was on the list, but he was like 10th or 11th. Like they had him on there, but he was much further down the list. And I have a lot of pride personally in that accomplishment, that the fact that the Japanese fans knew the difference and rewarded me for that in their rankings, right? I don't know, who was first, maybe Hansen and Scott and whoever was up there first, but I was at the top of the list, in the top five for sure. And I had been working every single tour, over there, kind of working that. And NWO was huge. I mean, we had Chono and Muda and Tenzan and Kojima and all those, the top talent, and so all that was just an amazing. And Scott Norton, if you ever get a chance, put him on your podcast, because the
Would
run we
love to.
had, and I'll give you his information, but the run that we had, we talk about it today, like it was like nothing else. And probably the best matches that I ever had and any of that stuff all took place during that NWO run and in New Japan. And we were just sold out every night, everywhere. And it was really exciting to be a part of that with New Japan. And unless you were over there, and it was something else.
Absolutely incredible times. And to be in that position, to be in the top three gaijins in the country at the height of professional wrestling at the late 90s, that is incredible. So
Yeah,
just before we do a bit more of a deep dive into
sure.
Japan, I'm going to ask you to lay up your Mount Rushmore, one of our favorite features on the show. We're going to talk about Mount Rushmore, and the topic that we've got for you, good sir, is your Mount Rushmore of face painted legends. So you've got to hit four that don the paint. Let's
All
see
right.
who's going to be
All right.
carved into.
Well, right off the bat, Steve,
Yep.
Sting would be there. And I think, his early, I always, I had this hope also. I kind of wanted him to go back to his original paint at some point. Like,
Yeah,
I,
surfer
I,
sting style, right?
yeah, I was hoping that he at some point would go back to that, even as if he wanted to come back as a retirement match or something. But just the fans would go nuts if he came back one time as Surfer Sting with the old paint. So definitely him. And again, you got to go Hellwig, Ultimate
Yep.
Warrior. Great paint job. I got to put Bill Eadie in there because he's my boy. And those guys were incredible. And then the last one I would put is the Road Warriors. So those top four, probably my Mount Rushmore for paint. I mean, Muda used a lot of paint in Japan, and there was that kind of stuff too, where they did that style. But for American wrestlers, that's my top four.
That is so interesting. And my son will pop when he hears this because word for word, that's his four on Mount Rushmore as well. How incredible. What a tie-in. Absolutely love that. Just before I'm going to bat over to Bryan to talk about Japan, I was actually watching some of your stuff this week as we were getting prepared for the show. And one of the things that really tickled me, I think it was a Saturday night taping that you were doing, and you were against Bunkhouse Buck. And you came out not in the NWO gear, but it was like the full Sting sort of
Yeah,
surfer style gear, but with the dark hair, right? And everybody's losing their minds for you and like high fiving. And then the camera just pans to this kid that's in the front row. And he just looks down the lens and then looks to his mom and goes, "That's not Stink." And it was honestly, I popped out of my chair. I was like, no shit. Have you been watching the TV, dude? Have all these people been watching the TV? It really made me pop. So I just needed to get that in there because that
yeah,
tickled
yeah.
me.
So early on with the NW, like I said, when it first happened, like it was only going to be a short thing.
Yeah,
But then they made me wrestle a few matches, like as the NWO Sting, really with the surfer paint, and I had
yeah.
the whole thing. So it's like a Bunkhouse Buck was one. There was a few more that they made me kind of go out and work as Sting to try to just annoy the fans and kind of get that here's a guy mimicking him and trying to do this. Like the NWO later was the thing, but you're right. There's a few matches where who was with Bagwell? They were teamed the handsome guys.
Oh, Scotty Riggs.
Scotty Riggs. I
Yeah.
did a match with Scotty Riggs, Bunkhouse Buck, and a few others where I was actually dressed as the Surfer Sting kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Oh,
So
I popped. I popped. It was like you've got an arena full of people, you got a soundstage full of people. and they are all literally eating it up. It's like,
Yeah,
yep, yep, yep. Let's keep
yeah.
going. So yeah, pop with that. Let's take it to Japan, Bryan. Let's take a little trip over the Pacific.
You got it. Earlier, you mentioned a couple of people, and I'm going to ask you any special memories about these two guys in Japan. It doesn't have to be a long story, just some of your thoughts. What about my partner, Bryan Adams? How was he in Japan?
Let me tell you something about Bryan Adams. You probably don't know this. I really, Bryan, I was so happy and grateful to meet Bryan Adams and to wrestle with Bryan Adams. And Bryan Adams came to my wedding. Okay, you
Oh,
don't know that, but I
I didn't
invited
know that.
Bryan. This was around '97, so it was during when Bryan was there with the NWO. Bryan was a mentor to me, just a great friend and somebody I admired and looked up to. As you know, Bryan, about Bryan, he was just a outstanding person, like really, really
Yeah.
humble, and could work and was big and and yeah, he at my wedding, which was that year, Bryan was there, Mike Rotundo was there, Chris Jericho was there, Black Cat was there, Tiger Hattori, the referee was there. Um, and this was in the US, so it was in Orlando, and all
Yeah.
those guys were there, and to this day, Bryan holds a special place for me, and what an amazing worker that guy was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he gets the credit he deserves. And like you said, just a sweetheart of a person in and out of the ring, man. I treasured every second I was with him, and it sounds like you did too.
Yeah, yeah. Though you don't meet those people that
No.
often that are just like that. I put Scott Norton in that list. I put Haku.
That was my next one. That was who I was going to
I
ask you
put
about next.
Ming in there. At
Yeah.
Barbarian. These and Bill Eadie, of course. These are
Hmm.
guys that legends really, but just the nicest, best kind of person. They're
Yeah.
every field has assholes. And people
Yeah.
that you're like, these people are full of themselves or believe the gimmick and believe everything, and they don't care about anybody, just care about self promotion and getting themselves over. And
Yeah.
these guys were just different. They cared about you and what if I was a nobody starting
Yeah.
out in a lot of these things, and these guys took me aside and gave me help and gave me some guidance and were just, there to say, hey, try this or do that. And I have special place for those kind of people in the business that were able to kind of help the next generation or help, because you're in a way too, you're competing against them for the job. What kind of person is going to say, hey, I'm going to help you do this better at the expense of my job, maybe? And that takes a special person. And they just were, they were confident and in their abilities. And again, Bryan, remember the big kick? Bryan, he could do so much. That guy was incredible.
And of course, the levity, the comedy at all, it
Yeah,
would make you laugh.
yeah.
Uh, and that's some of the big things I remember from Bryan and from Scott, both always easy. So yeah, that's good to hear. And some of those things I did not know, man. Thank you for sharing
And
that.
I'll tell you another one, Tom. You'll
Yeah.
like this especially. Maybe not for all of our people, but I remember, the Japanese are, and this is after I've been there a while, and Muda's a very close friend of mine, and Chono and Tenzan and Kojima and all those guys. You're living with them and working with them, So I remember one year I brought a fart machine over, and it's like a little remote control little fart machine. The Japanese are very strict about rules and etiquette, so you would never fart in front of somebody in Japan, even in the locker room with the boys, just not something you do. And I remember I tucked the little speaker thing into Muda's bag, and he was sitting there one side. I'm on the other side with Scott and the Gaijin guys, and I could press a little button, like they had like a little remote. And I could press a button and make the noise, right? And I was doing this, and it was one of the most it's so much fun to hear, them to listen and try to figure out who to blame it on because he's with the other guys. And it was just hysterical. I'd hit it every now and then. And then finally, we, let him in on it. And it was just so much fun. That kind of stuff, and Bryan knows this well, that kind of locker room camaraderie or whatever you want to call that, like it's a very powerful experience. And I've
Yeah.
talked about this before. It's a bond between wrestlers that's unique and strong, that unless you do it, I kind of equate it. Of course, it's not like the military, of course, and you're talking about something totally different. But I
Mhm.
think when you have a unit in the military, those guys all work together. They had to go through the hardships together. There's a bond there. Obviously not as strong as like a military experience, but there's a bond in pro wrestling with the guys that go through it and have to do it, and it's tough, and you're on the road and you're living out of a suitcase and you're putting your body on the line. and you're doing and you're depending on these people to support you and take care of you and watch your back. And it is a unique bond that I don't think a lot of, and I played team sports, football. I don't have that bond with people I played football with. I don't have that bond with other sports I was in, but wrestling it's different.
I totally agree with that. Absolutely, yes.
What an answer. What a positive answer. That's exactly what our show is all about. So
Yeah.
it's reminiscing, it's bringing everything together
And
and being a part of that. I
yeah,
mean,
especially and that can lead the segue, Brian, a little bit into to Scott Norton. Now, Scott, is a big kid from Minnesota. Scott has an incredible story. You have to have him on the show. One of the biggest stories, I tell this story. I was not there, but I tell this story to people. I don't know if you know this story at all, but he was at the Mall of America in Minnesota, and I heard it, and I talked to Scott about this personally, and he was there. It was they had, they have like fishing, fly fishing expos and all this kind of stuff going. It's a huge mall, and Scott was there, and they had a grizzly bear that you could wrestle the bear. It's like a huge, like 600 pound or whatever grizzly, and it had a big muzzle and a chain and all this stuff. So Scott, he tells me the story. You got to get it from him. You got to get it from him though. He's there with his buddies, and they're drinking and they're announcing the names of the three people that were chosen to try to wrestle the bear. And Scott's name is called, and he looks at his friends like you guys. So he goes up there and he said he watched the first guy. And he said, the bear is huge, and he said the bear they were kind of circling. He said the bear just took his arm and put it around the guy and just put his shoulder down and pinned him to the ground, and that was it, right? And the next guy did the same thing. And Scott, also, you don't know the background on Scott. This guy benched like 606, 60
Oh,
pounds or some insane amount of weight. And he was a world champion arm wrestler. So Scott was not your average human being as far as strength wise, right? This is another level of guy. So he goes in there, and the bear tried the same move, and Scott said he sidestepped the bear and he grabbed it in like a front face lock. He said he could barely get his arms around the neck of the bear. Do you know this story, Brian?
keep going.
Okay, so he said he could barely get his hands in like a front face lock. So he's got the bear by the neck, right? And so, and he said he's barely could lock him up, but he locked it up. And the bear, knows like this is not normal. Like this is not a normal hold on me. Like this is what's going on. So the bear's trying to kind of shake off Scott, right? And Scott, he said that when the bear started like moving that much, and it's an incredible, powerful animal. He said it made him tighten his grip even more, like he's now hanging on. He said the bear stood straight up. And and he said now Scott is upside down like a suplex. His feet are in the air, but he's not letting go of the neck of the bear because he's 7 feet up and he's like hanging on for dear life. He said, unreal. And the guy who's running the show, he's freaking out. He's trying to get the bear. They're trying to get the bear under control. He's got a big muzzle and a chain, whatever, because it's a grizzly bear. They're beating the bear, trying to get under control. He said the bear throws him down. And he said before he could even do anything, the bear was on top of him with both of his paws right on his shoulders. And he said the bear is trying to headbutt him with the bear's trying to headbutt him with his head. And he has a big ring on his nose. And Scott said he's just avoiding the skull blows. So they're hitting him like in the pecs, because he's just turning his head. Meanwhile, the people are trying to wrangle the bear in. And then he said the bear swatted him, and he said he went flying across the stage thing and towards the water. He said the bear was going to go drown. The trainer said he's trying to get you in the water to drown you in the water. Anyway, they finally get the bear under control. And Scott has to go to the hospital, because I mean, it's like this huge rings, where and fur everywhere, like the bear.
Oh.
And so he goes to the hospital, and they say, okay, and he had all these bruises and everything like that. But the funny part of the story is that Scott, this is later, he's at a gas station, and this guy goes, hey, hey, I recognize you. Scott's thinking, from the NWO or wrestling. He goes, you're the guy that fought that bear. So you should have him on the show and tell the story.
Oh my God, yes. And to tie that into that story, when you said the bear had him up, Scott was what, 350?
360. Yeah, he was huge. I know Scott wasn't that tall, but Scott's had a huge torso and a big, strong guy. Like Scott was probably at that point 360, 365. And the bear just picked him. And he said it was like nothing. The bear just stood up like he didn't have anything on him. So that just shows you how strong the bear was. But to go back to Scott, also, not only was he physically like that, but the guy's got one of the biggest hearts of anybody I know. Just the kind, the guys, Bryan, that are
Yeah.
like that, that are just, and was it not for Scott showing me the way? Masa Saito was really my boss, and I loved Masa Saito. I mean, that guy was really a mentor for me and like a father figure for me over there. And Scott too. We both, would do whatever Masa told. If they said jump off a cliff, we would have both jumped. And amazing individual, Masa Saito. And with, Scott would tell me, they want this, they need you to be more stiff or physical, or they want you to do this power thing, or whatever it was. And Black Cat too, another rest his soul, and another amazing guy. But had it not been for Scott Norton and those guys, kind of guiding me and showing me what they wanted, I was able to morph it into whatever it was they were looking for and be able to do it. And that's why I was successful. It wasn't me, it was because those people kind of showed me the way and showed me the ropes, and it allowed me to kind of perform in a way that they were expecting and wanted. So always I talk about Scott and New Japan. If it had not been for him, because you would see, Bryan knows this too. If you couldn't perform at that level, Tom, they would say, okay, thank you. We appreciate you coming over for the
Next.
tour,
Right.
and you're not going to get called back again. One of the big things about New Japan, if they're calling you back on a regular basis, you're doing something right. If they're not calling you back, if that phone's not ringing, you're not what they, not that you can't get there, but you're not what they're wanting at the time. So it was a tough environment, but an awesome environment. When I talk about it, and Scott and I talk about it all the time, like it was probably the pinnacle and highlight of my career was probably wrestling for that company, with that company, at the time in that company.
That's incredible. What a wonderful story. It's something we've never heard before. We've definitely got to get Scott on. What a wonderful
Yeah,
act of kindness, taking you under his wing over there.
yeah.
And yeah, we have got to probe him on doing the job for Yogi Bear. Yeah, we'll get him on and we'll do that. Amazing.
And
We'll
and they
definitely have
also
some
told him,
picnic baskets ready for him.
like, don't, they said, don't, you can't come back here because if the bear sees you, he's going to try to kill you. Like they actually said, like, because here's the story. I don't know if this is true or not. Scott wanted a rematch. He's like, I'm gonna do it again or something. They're like, are you crazy? The
Oh
guy
my
said that
God.
if that bear ever sees you, he's gonna
Oh
try.
yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
A
Actually,
rematch.
not content with just doing the one-shot job, he wanted a full-on angle.
Yeah,
Oh, I
That's
love it.
great.
Now, let's talk about, we've just talked about two incredible names in Bryan Adams and Scott Norton. And being a proud Brit, it would be remiss of me if I didn't ask about some of the Brits that were on tour with you guys,
of course.
namely Robbie
Dave Taylor,
Brookside, Ireland's Fit
Ro-
Finley,
Ro- uh,
Wayne Fit Finley.
Robbie
Lay
Brookside. Tom, nobody knows that guy. Let me tell you, I have a picture with Robbie Brookside. Another guy that I just kind of fell in love with that guy. What a gem Robbie Brookside was. He had the long hair
Yeah.
and so much fun to be around. He came over on a regular basis to New Japan. He was working with the juniors and so, wherever they put him. Well, what an amazing worker, Robbie Brookside. My goodness. And so I have a couple pictures of Robbie and I having a beer at a pub. And a big one that I cherish and he was awesome. Those guys were good. And then, Dave Taylor and Fit Finley and of course uh, Steve Regal. Again, the Brits, those guys, they were revered in New Japan. They really were. Like those guys were revered by the company because they could all work. They were all amazing. They were all tough guys. They could do everything. And the Japanese held them in very high regard. All of those guys from there. And Brookside and those guys came over on regular. Steve is another one that I really respect and really also helped me. Like I would be at ringside. I'm going to write a book at some point about being. So I would be at ringside watching these guys, and just learning from just observing, like watching them work and watching what they did and how they did it. And again, I'm grateful to have been in the ring with all of those guys, Brookside and Steve and Dave and the European guys were, they were another level. So I definitely, and that was a nice thing about New Japan is that they would take wrestlers from Europe not Big Daddy. I don't know if he came over there, but
Yeah.
I almost went on a tour over there with those guys. I did kind of do some, but they would take them from Mexico, the luchadors. They would incorporate other styles into their shows, which was amazing. And they all learned from that because it's all different. Like in Mexico, they worked the left arm or the other arm instead of the right arm. There's all this kind of stuff that you had to kind of know. And that's another group of guys that I learned from and just we're so enthralled to watch them work and be a part of that. I used to watch all that. I mean, that was one of the things I wouldn't, I was, I mean, I should have been more focused on my job, but I was also, like very interested in seeing how they worked and what they did and all that. So yeah,
Student of
those
the
guys
game.
were great. Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. Absolutely. I mean, for all those names that you just reeled off, what incredible talents. We are proud to have them as our countrymen over here
Yeah.
in the UK. So, yes.
And you should be proud. They're an awesome bunch and they're incredible. And again, it's so funny because Bryan knows this. It's like I somehow, because I think it was a timing I was in, just if I was to write a list of everybody I got to get in the ring with, it's just I was fortunate enough to get in the ring with a lot of the older legends, especially in Japan, like Fujinami and Choshu and all those guys, back which was and then the next generation of Chono and Muda, and even the newer generation with Tanahashi. And I mean, I have an old film with Tanahashi. It's one of my favorites, tag team match when Scott and I. And so just being able to go through those generations and being kind of with the older generation and then the new generation a little bit, I just feel incredibly grateful to have had the opportunity to kind of do that. And one of my takeaways is just how grateful I was to experience that with like Iron Mike Sharp. When do you get to do that?
Yeah, that is very few people get to say that. And a lot of people, the generation gaps, they don't even really know who Mike Sharp is and then they get to hear the inside stories of what we talked about today.
Yeah.
You know, really
Or
classic
Junkyard
stuff.
Dog. Like I wrestled a house show with Junkyard Dog. Like, and he was, I mean, and even, just being able to do that, was like, those guys are gone and they were a
Yeah,
generation that was old school, really old school. And just to have that experience, I know, Bryan, you got to wrestle all those guys too. So,
yeah,
we were around kind of in that transitional phase, right? From the old timers to, I guess, us. Now we're old timers, but,
yes.
it was a neat experience.
Well, you might
Yeah.
refer to yourselves as old timers, but you look fresh as daisies
We're
and
old
ready
timers.
to go. Ready to go. Well, speaking of ready to go, I think it's time that we flex it one more time, Bryan. What do you think? We're going to go into part two of
The
our most
championship
muscular.
is
So
up.
let's see. The Ultimate Warrior is currently on his podium on one side of the ring. Let's see who's going to be facing him on the other as we get prepared for round two. Here we go. We're going to start very interesting because it's a name that you've already brought up on the show. The Patriot Del Wilkes
Yeah.
or Ravishing Rick Rude.
Oh, that's another tough one. Um, just because I really like Del Wilkes, I'm definitely going to go with Del Wilkes. I knew Rick Rude too because he was in WCW. He was leaner and more cut, so that could give him an edge in that way. But I always thought Del just as a big, strong, athletic guy and he had a great look. So I'll go with Del Wilkes.
Incredible look. And from what I feel, he had a really raw deal in the WWF. Could have been so much
Yeah,
more. So
for
let's let's
sure.
let's put him over. Del Wilkes, the Patriot or Batista.
Woo! Another Batista at one point had one of the best physiques I think in wrestling. So I'm going to give it to Dave.
Let's go. Drax the Destroyer goes over. Batista or John Cena.
I never met John Cena, but I like John Cena's physiques, a little compact and powerful. And he's from Massachusetts, where I was originally from, so I like him for that nod. But I'm still going to go with Batista as the best physique.
Sticking with Big Dave.
Yeah,
Let's see how well this one goes over. Batista or Triple H.
Batista. I mean, I remember Triple H from WCW when he was not that big, right? He was kind of skinny, and when he was doing the stuff with the Regal and those guys and Dave Taylor, they were doing what was the character they were doing?
The Blue Bloods gimmick.
Yeah, the Blue
Yeah.
Bloods. So,
Yeah.
I remember him then, and then he got a lot bigger in the WWF, or WWE, but uh, and I like him, but no comparison in the physiques.
No comparison. Batista or Bobby Lashley.
Bobby Lashley, again, a great package, big physical guy. Haven't never seen him in person, so but I'm still going to give the nod to Batista. That guy was a beast, man.
Absolute beast. And let's not sleep on Bobby Lashley. I was with him this past weekend. He is an absolute machine. Batista or the Warlord?
Ah, you're making this tough, Tom.
Yeah, bro,
Um,
that's it. Honestly,
you
I am
know,
like Alex Trebek of the social media world.
for sure. The Warlord, what a big, massive man he was, and so when you look at just raw power and the physique is just so intimidating when you see a guy like that, and always a spectacle to watch, which again goes back to Tony Atlas and Butch Reed. Oh, that was Ron Simmons and Butch Reed. Ron Simmons too. All those guys, incredible physiques. And intimidation is, that was the whole point of wrestling, and that's actually where Hogan, had a very amazing physique, which was very intimidating when he first came in. I was like, ooh and ah, right?
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I'm going to give it to Batista.
Keeping with Batista, Batista or Goldberg?
Bill, again, great physique, athletic guy, obviously had the football background. Sticking with Batista.
Batista or Hercules Hernandez?
Oh, and I wrestled with Herc too. Again, he was kind of the old school look, which was not as defined and cut, but that look to me was very impressive of those guys that were in that category. He was definitely in there. But as far as a polished physique bodybuilder type look with the cuts and everything, I'm gonna give the nod to Batista.
Keeping on with Batista, Batista or the masterpiece Chris Masters?
He had a great physique. I didn't see him much, but he definitely got cut a little bit more and had great symmetry and a great physique. But I'm gonna go with Batista because
Yeah,
he's my
keep it
boy.
going. He is the man. He is the man,
Yeah.
and he does walk alone. Two more names: Batista or the Machine, Brian Cage.
He's new, and I have to say, he's worked in Japan, I think. So I don't follow wrestling that much now, which I am embarrassed to say, but I remember seeing Brian Cage pop up, and I remember thinking, wow, what a good physique this guy has. I haven't seen a physique like this in a long time, in pro wrestling. And I don't know if that just hasn't been the trend to really get that muscular. It's more like you don't need it now. Like back in the day, if you didn't bring something to the table physique wise, you were probably not going to get a second look. And that's changed, I think, in the business. You have guys like CM Punk and those kind of guys that aren't necessarily physical specimens, but they can work. And Bryan Danielson and those guys, incredible workers. But the physique wasn't as important. The emphasis wasn't on it as much. So, but I do think he looks amazing, and I'm glad to see that kind of coming back a little bit. But I still gonna give it to Batista.
Still gonna keep it with Batista. We've got one more name: Batista or NWO Sting.
I am no match for Batista, but
Ah,
no match there. He really could have done some probably professional level bodybuilding if he had so pushed himself in that direction. I feel like, and you can't say that about a lot of physiques, but definitely Dave. I know he's trimmed down now and he's a Hollywood famous actor, which I think kudos to him for doing that and having the ability to do that. A lot of guys get stuck on being big, right? And they can never like get off of that track. And, it's not healthy to be 330 pounds, on your heart and all that kind of stuff. So when I see these athletes, and Batista is one of them that kind of make the health improvements for better. Dorian Yates is another one. That guy
Yes.
is now like doing yoga and cardio and taking care of his body. That makes me happy for those guys. It makes me say, hey, I'm really proud of Batista to be able to do that. And The Rock recently trimmed down too, I think,
yes, he did.
for something. So that is the path to have. I know Bryan, is also taking care of his health and trimming down, but he can't get small. So that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah,
He's too
right.
big to get small, but some of these guys, can trim up and it's better for them.
What a run there, big man. What an absolute beast of a run. So we got the Ultimate Warrior on one side
Here
and
it is.
Batista on the other side. So here's the question, Jeff.
Oh, you're not going to ask me this, are you?
Oh
There
yeah.
we go. Warrior Batista.
Wow. Wow. That's really, really tough. And that really kind of goes to the kind of physique you like, right? Now, I think Ultimate Warrior has a little more of the classic physique.
Yeah.
of my era and Brian's younger than me, but that kind of area of the kind of classic physique a little bit. I think Batista represents more of the more modern physique, probably a little bit more out of what Yates was able to do to get like really hard and rugged and tight and look like that. So it kind of depends on which kind of physique you admire. I mean, our Schwarzenegger is always going to be probably my top physique of all time, just because I think he just looked amazing at one point. But I'm going to give the nod between those two to Batista.
Yes, there we go. Big Dave has taken it. He is a guardian of the galaxy and
Yeah.
flex it on. So let's light up those guns. Batista takes the W. Excellent job, bro. That's
Good job,
lovely.
man.
Love
All
that. Love
right. Yeah.
that.
No. Glad to be a part of it.
Good. Now,
You know,
Bryan, one of those
yeah,
names is
go ahead.
very interesting. So I'm going to let you bat this one up because it flows so beautifully.
It does. It goes right into our next question here from our good friend Jonathan O'Dwyer, all the way from Ireland. He wanted to know if you ever had any interactions with the gentleman we were just talking about, the Ultimate Warrior. Did you ever have any time with him?
That's a great question. And shout out to Jonathan. I did an
Yeah.
interview with him as
Yep.
well. What a gem he is. Such a nice guy. And Jonathan, if you watch this, please know that I appreciate our time that we had on the podcast. And you were such a well-versed and knowledgeable person about wrestling, which really impressed me. So hope he's doing well. Warrior came into WCW when I was there, if you remember,
Yeah.
because you were around there, Bryan,
Yep.
in WCW when he came in. And like some of those guys, like Hogan and those guys, they kind of kept to themselves a little bit more, and sometimes had a private dressing room. And I was down with the low guys in the back dressing room with us back then, especially. I wasn't privy to be in any of those kind of things. So I think some of those interactions, to answer his question, they kind of kept themselves, and it probably helped their image and their careers to try to keep themselves a little separated and act like they were a bigger deal or that they were special and that they had to have a special private dress room. So I really don't believe, and Bryan, you can check me on this, but I don't really believe we had a lot of access to him in the back, and it wasn't an area where, I mean, you would see him come out obviously for his match or the show, and you see him walking around sometimes in his outfit, but most of the boys, and Bryan knows this, everybody's doing the exact same job. There's nothing different from my job than your job. Like, it's not like you're doing something different. We're all doing the exact same thing, and we're all, it's just different people. But so in the back with the boys, everybody was on a pretty good level of talking with each other and saying hello and how's everything and how's your family. Most everybody was like that, which was good. But there was times when I think there was this separation, and guys like Arn Anderson talk about this. They don't like that. Like, what makes you better than Brian Clark? He's actually looks better than you, right? And he can work better than you. And so, you really shouldn't, put yourself above this person. But that was just kind of the way the business kind of worked, and Bryan knows that, and I'm sure you do, Tom. So yeah, I saw him, but I didn't have any personal interaction with him at all. And that was he didn't last long, if you remember,
He
Bryan. He
did.
was in
Yeah.
WCW a short time, and then he was out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
I
about
think
three
he
or 4
came
months.
in for a bit. Then I think he had an injury, right?
Yeah,
Did he?
something happened. Yeah, or a
Yeah.
contract dispute. Who knows?
Could
Something. He
be.
just,
Yeah.
and it was towards the end. I mean, I thought he had an incredible gimmick and great run in and the energy, and I thought that was, especially for the time in the WWF, which was like all energy and hype and all that. And
Mhm.
there was a lot more kids, in that arena then. So for kids to see that, I mean, I thought he had a great niche, for what he was doing. So yeah,
Agree.
He did. He cornered the market in the WWF and he
yeah,
took it over to WCW. And I just
and
felt it just wasn't for that particular time.
and
But
and I.
Jonathan,
Oh, okay. I got one more tiny little thing if you want to, which kind of segues into this. Do you remember there was a guy that did his gimmick?
Renegade, right?
No, Renegade did too, but there was another guy he was in the WWF with you, Bryan, or WWE. Um, Chris Walker.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
Conan Chris Walker. Yes, I
Yeah.
remember him.
Do you
Yeah, yeah.
remember that
I
guy?
sure. Well, I remember him. I don't know if he did a warrior type gimmick, but he looked like A little bit, right?
Well, he did like a warrior
Did he?
knockoff kind of thing, either barbarian or dingo warrior, not dingo warrior. He did something, but he had
Okay.
the same, but an amazing physique. I mean, he should be in the physique class, and probably a few
Yes.
forgotten about him. But
Yeah, I
he
did.
did the whole thing. But I remember he was there, and we did a tour in India actually, which ended up being a riot, and
Oh,
actually that's a long story which I won't go into. But I remember Chris Walker,
yeah.
and he
He
was
was
also
a
doing
he
that.
was a Atlanta area guy, I
Yeah,
think.
I think so.
I think so. Yeah. Oh yeah, I definitely remember him. Real nice guy. Had a
Yeah,
great look.
yeah.
Yeah,
He
sure
looked a
did.
hell of a lot like Jim. He looked a lot like Jim.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did look like him, and he had the long hair, kind of curly hair
Mhm.
too. He had that
Yep.
grown out. He did a lot of independent shows, I think. I don't know if he did a lot with WWF or WWE, but he did a lot of more independent stuff, I think. But he looked like the Warrior.
Well, there's a shout out. We like that. We like hearing names that we've not actually mentioned on the show. So big shout out to Conan, Chris Walker. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Right, I think we are at the point of our show where we are going to get set to tie everything up in a nice big bow with Jeff, and it's time to set those fires burning because I'm about to hit you with some rapid fire questions, and it's a case of no overthinking. Whatever is on the tip of your tongue,
Oh,
frontal
goodness.
frontal cortex, just give it as quick as you possibly can. Don't think, don't go
Hmm.
into it, just boom. What is on your mind? So
Tom,
let's
that could
get
be
ready.
dangerous.
Oh, we get dangerous. We called the meltdown, buddy. Let's go. We like to keep it all positive, but we have got those flames alight. Right, here we go. It's time for rapid fire. Chops or super kicks?
Chops,
Entrance smoke or pyro?
entrance smoke,
Heel turn or surprise return?
heel turn,
Pre-match hype music or silence?
hype music,
Heel or babyface?
heel,
Cage or ladder match?
cage.
Favorite cheat meal?
Mm. Big fat cheeseburger,
Yes, that's a 2 for the cheeseburger. Sweet or salty?
salty.
Go-to karaoke song?
Oh, Ring of Fire by Johnny Cash.
Excellent choice. Would you time travel backwards or forwards?
Backwards.
Good. Any point? Any point?
No, just the maybe turn of the century and just seeing some of the historical people that,
I like it.
I don't know.
I like that. Favorite city to wrestle in?
Tokyo.
What's the weirdest thing that you carry in your kit bag?
My wrestling bag?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's not weird tape, I guess, like tape. I used to tape my fingers sometimes, so I'd have to break it up into small pieces. So if someone saw that in my bag, they're like, what is he doing with this?
That's good. The last thing that you Googled.
A shotgun, actually.
Oh, weird. That's it. That is very interesting. Quite intriguing. What's the secret talent you pretend not to have?
Wow. I don't know. I play the drums a little bit, so it's not very talented, but and maybe not a secret, but I like banging on the skin sometimes, but I'm
Like
not that
that,
good
like
at it.
that. We are learning a lot more about you, sir. Finally, you're the strangest compliment you have ever received.
Mm. Man, that is tough. I don't know. Probably like nice outfit, the tights or something maybe was a kind of a
It's all
weird
about the
compliment.
tights, right?
Yeah.
Love that lycra. We love that spandex. And yet, the strangest compliment Bryan has ever received, I tell him every week, and this is weird, from a heterosexual man on the other side of the world, that he is the finest man in any room. So there we go. Well done. He smashed a rapid fire. Well done, Jeff. Awesome. Love that, Bryan.
Well,
Absolutely.
I would like to say that I had what's his name his underwear, but that's not in my bag.
I'm going to find it.
Oh, Sergeant's underwear, right?
Sergeant Slaughter, yeah. If I
Yeah.
could have said that, if I had those, I would pull that out and say that's the strangest.
See, yeah, he's
Let's
ribbing
take
us,
a
right?
pew and bring this into full force. It's Sergeant Slaughter's underwear,
Wow.
and he
All
signed it
right.
right on the
And he
crotch. I don't
signed
know
them.
whether you can see that
I can
right on
see
the
that,
crotch
yes.
line. That
All
is
right.
the weirdest thing. And I've also got a picture of him.
I thought he was ribbing me. He really has them.
I
It's
really have it.
awesome. It's
There's
awesome that he
Sarge
has
right
it.
there. So weird. It's like a
Okay. No,
museum here in Manchester.
That's good.
Maybe a
Very
lock
good.
of hair is next. You got the underwear. Maybe a lock of hair. Is that next,
I'm
Tomcat?
just going to hold that for Lee Oliver. If that's all right, we'll hold it there. We'll hold it there.
Oh, look, we have fans all over the world watching the Meltdown. We love it, man. It's good stuff.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
It is. I'm still popping at the fact that we've got a guy sat in his boat in Lake Michigan listening to us. That's the one. That's the one for
Yeah.
me. We
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
We like that.
Well,
Brian,
yeah.
let's get ready to wrap everything up in a beautiful big bow, and we will let Jeff go. But it's been an absolutely incredible show. So final question to pose to the big man.
Uh, did we want to ask him this as an outro here about you almost becoming an American gladiator? Can you hit me
Ah,
with that one?
you knew that? How'd you get that information?
Research, brother.
So I'll give you this story because it's actually
Okay.
pretty good. I was working at a gym, and they came into town for contestants, right? And I had watched this show, as we all did at the time. It was
Right.
very popular.
Yes.
And I hated that little guy Nitro, whoever that was. I wanted to wring his neck when I watched the show. 'Cause I just didn't like how he came off, how he portrayed himself, this kind of stuff. And I was always watching like, well, if I could get in there, I'd give him a thrashing, right? So they came to our town for contestants, and I signed up to be a contestant to go against Nitro. And I was pretty big at the time, but I had good strength. So, and as a linebacker, actually, I ran a 4.5,
Wow.
in college. So I had good speed at the time. Not I didn't run a 4.5 then, but I'm saying they came, and the whole tryout, and Bryan, you'll appreciate this, was really designed to eliminate anyone big. So that you had to run a certain speed in the 40-yard dash. You had to do like 4.8 or better or something like that. Pretty fast. You had to do a whole bunch of push-ups in under time, which a heavy guy or somebody really strong might be able to max. You had to do some other agility thing. And then the last thing we had to do pull-ups. And you had like, I think 2 minutes. You had time to drop off the bar, but you had to do like 17 pull-ups or something, and I'm, 250, 260, trying to do pull-ups. And I remember during this thing, so I had gone through this whole, thing of everything, and I'm at the last event, and there's all these people kind of standing around, the promoters and the people that are there to do it all. They're like kind of watching, right? And I get to the pull-ups, and I got 15 or something. I couldn't do it. I dropped off. I'm shaking out. I couldn't do it. And I was like, shit, I was really disappointed. And they came over and they said, and I said, what? I said, what's going on? They said, we were really sweating that you were gonna make it. And I said, why? Isn't that the whole point of the show to kind of, he said, no. He said, they don't want to get hurt. They don't want someone like you to be on the show. And I said, but they said, we really like you to be a gladiator, to do the gladiator. And they said, we have a gladiator tryout, which is different than the contestant tryout. And it's going to be in Orlando or coming back or whatever. They were coming back. So the guy who was a promoter guy gave me his card and said, we're going to call you back for this when we do the gladiator tryout. So they came into town. I went to that tryout, and it was a different thing. It was more from the gladiator side. And I remember that the thing where you run over and put the ball in the
Yes.
basket.
Oh
And
yeah,
and
yeah.
so I mean, I was a linebacker, like that's my jam, right? So
Yeah.
I'm in there, and they said keep him from the basket. So I'm like shoving the guy down, and then they blow the whistle and they said, can you let him like get close to the basket or try to put a ball in the basket? I say, well, you told me not to let him in the basket area. He's like, no, you. And so they said, just tackle him. And so anyway, that was one of those crazy drills. Like do a rope climb and some other stuff. So at the end, the guy says, yeah, we want you to be a gladiator. We're going to sign you, but you have to go to Europe. Because it was actually in Europe, I think it was there. They just started a European version of the gladiator, I think in Europe. They said, you have to go to Europe. And I was just married at the time, and I wasn't really doing the wrestling. And this was right around NWO Sting, actually, because I wasn't happy with Cobra and what was going on. I was thinking about not even going to wrestle, and it's crazy. Bryan knows how difficult that can be sometimes. And they called me and they said, "Hey, we want you to do it. You're going to go to Europe and you're going to get this amount of money." And I remember around that same time, Eric contacted me and said, because I was off from like WCW a little bit and I had some time and I was thinking about what I was going to do. And that's when he said, "Hey, we got this NWO Sting. We want you to do it." And I remember having this discussion with my wife and I said, "Well, what should I do? Should I take this American Gladiator job and transition into this or should I stay with wrestling? I don't know what's going to happen. And she was like, you know how to wrestle. You've been doing that. Why don't you do the wrestling? And so that was really a crossroads for me, not to do the gladiator, but to get back into pro wrestling or do that switch. It was around the same time.
Wow. What a
Close,
story.
close call, right?
Yeah, it
So
was a close call. I mean, I
yeah,
was considering it, but the pay wasn't that good either. I forget what they were paying. Like, it's a back in the day. It was like
yeah.
875 a week or something like that. I don't know and it was a long time ago. But
So where in Europe were they going to send
I,
you?
I don't know
Yeah.
exactly
Okay.
where it was in Europe, but he said we have a European that's opening
Okay.
up, and you're going to be one of the guys we want to put in the European theater. I don't know if it was
Gotcha.
like traveling around in England or where, but they had they had it was starting there because it was popular, really popular in the U.S. and they were starting to move
Yeah.
it around to other places. It ended up, of course, collapsing, so I'm glad I didn't do that because it wasn't that long after that it all went
Yeah.
downhill for the American Gladiators. But yeah, I was going to do it.
It was serendipitous for you, brother, that you made that right
Yeah.
choice and took a
Yeah.
trip over to Japan. Just before we wrap things up, there was a question that I thought about a little bit earlier on and was intrigued by, seeing as that you were under brand and under contract with WCW. Were they fitting the bill for you appearing in New Japan, or were New Japan paying the contracts for the
Oh,
WCW?
that's a great question. So we had a deal, like a reciprocity deal with New Japan. So WCW had that. So you had some guys that came over, like Yuji Nagata. I don't know,
Yep,
Yuji came
yep.
over and Nakanishi, remember Nakanishi? He had a gimmick here where he was Japanese, wore the black tights. So some of those guys were already coming over. And Scott Norton was also, he was the IWGP heavyweight champion. So he was coming over, which is why he was in WCW. So he could easily go back and forth. So there was a contract, I believe, with New Japan about sharing talent and having this reciprocity where their talent came here and our talent came there. But it's another good story actually. When I went to New Japan, the WCW was paying New Japan for me for
Okay.
my contract. So they paid whatever WCW asked them for, right? And I remember towards the end of WCW, and Bryan, you'll remember this. J.J. Dillon called me, and that's when the AOL Time Warner merger kind of was happening. And he called
Mhm.
me to say, look, we're gonna shut down. We're not gonna need you, basically, in WCW. I knew it was kind of the end, at this point, I was already good 3, 4 years working steady in Japan. So I immediately called Masa Saito, and I said, look, Masa, they're gonna cut my contract, with WCW. And he said, I remember distinctly, he said, Jeff, please don't go to the WWF. He said, please don't go anywhere. I'll honor the exact contract you have. You stay there. I'm going to have you stay here. Don't go anywhere. Don't do anything. And I knew, Tom, over the phone that contract was done because Massa was such a man of his word and that we didn't even handshake. It was done over the phone. And I knew when he said that I had a job ready for me there. And I remember we opened some champagne in my house, and I said it's the first time I got fired and hired in the same, day or same whatever, a few hours. Because after I got off the phone with JJ, I immediately called Masa, and I don't even know what time it was, in Japan, but and he honored that, and that was, one of those things that I also take away from Masa and the Japanese culture, just to say that I got you and don't go anywhere, and he did.
Brilliant. Happy endings. And the legend of Super J carries on.
That's another one. They were changing the name after NWO, and I'm like, he's like, we're gonna change your name, whatever. And I said, okay, I don't care, whatever. You can put me in a tutu. You're paying me, right?
Yep.
And he came up with the day. I didn't come up with Super J. They came up with Super J, and I kind of asked him like, why Super J? He said it's easy for the Japanese to say. Like
Yep.
they knew Super, I guess, and J is just a letter. So he said it was easy for them to announce. So you would go into Super J. You could hear him, when they did that. So I said, okay, whatever, Masa.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just nod your head. Go for it.
Yeah,
Super J
of
was over
course.
with me. Loved it. Loved it. Loved it. Bryan, let's get ready for the go home.
You got it. Jeff, first of all, man, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us today. All your legendary stories that you've told us today and your amazing career in Japan and the US through all your characters. You've always been such a stand-up guy. And just really appreciate you taking the time for us today, man. I know our fans, all the Meltdown listeners around the world, are going to love to hear this story. And again, we appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, thank you, Bryan and Tom, and definitely, Bryan is the guys I talk about. Bryan's one of those guys.
Oh, appreciate you,
How
man.
incredible.
Yeah.
I've just spent a week with the most incredible talent, and they have all just echoed that sentiment that he is a
Oh yeah.
legend.
Yeah.
So, from one legend to the other, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together. It's been an absolute pleasure welcoming him to the Meltdown. It's Jeff Farmer.
Thank you, guys.
What an absolute dream that was of interacting and reconnecting with the legend that is Jeff Farmer. Whether or not you knew him as Cobra or nWo Sting, Super J in Team 2000, he is a hit all the way around the world, and he is a hit here on the Meltdown. Raise a cup for the working man, Jeff Farmer. This goes out to you. Now, as we chin chin, what's in your cup today, Bryan?
Oh, Tomcat, once again, I'm going back to back with the Blackout 1776 Dark Roast by veterans, made in the USA. A great smooth afternoon blend, and it's coffee with values. That's what I like about it the best. The taste is fantastic, but you get what you pay for with Blackout 1776, Tomcat.
Blackout 1776. Make sure you check out your local suppliers and get it in while you can and get your blackout fix. We love it from here on the Meltdown. It's been another incredible show, and we have got more coming at you each and every week. And we need your feedback, peeps. We need you because you are the essence of our broadcast. We want to know exactly what you would like to hear and from the show, what artists you would like us to reach out to, which superstars that you would like to hear stories from. Now's your opportunity to be a part. You can be the booker. Yes, you can win your very own Bill Watts of 2026 trophy. That's what it's all about. Hit us up at our social media channels. You can hit us right here on at Real Bryan Clark on YouTube. Each and every show that we do a live premiere where you can get in depth with the Bomber and the Tomcat, or you can hit us up on Instagram at the Meltdown Official, at Bryan Clark 3X Champ, at Tom Finkill. We are very accessible. All you need to do is drop us a little message and we will do what we do better than anybody else. And I believe you've had some peeps get in touch.
You know it, Tom. Each and every week, we today, like with Jeff, he told us so many great stories, had me laughing. Pop of the night, no doubt about it, and all to due to Jeff Farmer and his great stories. But I want to send a big shout out before we wrap this up today to Melissa, who is a big time supporter of the Meltdown. Thank you so much, Melissa. And of course, our good buddy Jonathan O'Dwyer, who got his question answered by Jeff Farmer today. Also, our friends on Facebook at PWEF, our good buddy Adam Sentif, Giorgio, who's always in the crowd, and of course, Arizona's own Aaron Spalding, a big time supporter, and of course, all of our veterans around the world. We appreciate you. We thank you so much. And everyone, have a wonderful week. Tomcat, any other parting words?
I
Are
want to
you
say hello and thank you so much to the incredible crew. I was stopped by so many wonderful people at For the Love of Wrestling to tell me how much they appreciate the Meltdown, which is incredible. But want to send out a few big shout outs to Collection WCW doing an incredible job. And what a supreme amount of merch, amount of memorabilia, a full on collection WCW. Follow them on Instagram. And also the one and only Kev Bamba, who is the Paul Heyman cosplay guy. He is out of this world. So much so that Karrion Kross actually took a picture with Kev and sent it to Paul Heyman. And then later on, when there was a little interview going on, a certain killer's phone went off and the Oracle was on the other end. It's been a very interesting weekend. So, Kev, We send our nothing but gratitude to you, good sir. Yes, we will raise a finger. Ladies and gentlemen, his name is Paul Heyman, cosplay guy. We love it. From me here in Manchester, we're going to see you guys next week, and we've got more treats up our sleeve. We'll see you all soon, because you know that shoes ain't cheap. Booking ain't easy. See us next week. Same Meltdown time, same Meltdown channel. We'll leave you with the bomber. See you next week, peeps. A boom.
Thank you, Tomcat. Again, everyone, thank you all for joining this week. Really was a fun episode. I was laughing just about the whole show. So, again, thanks so much, Jeff Farmer. And again, next week, we will be breaking necks and cashing checks right here on The Meltdown. We'll see you then.
Ah, boom.